Welcome to Business Unmuted Live, a video business discussion on Wednesday 30th of June 2021, which is shared on platforms including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Business Unmuted is sponsored by Virtue BMW, part of Gateshead-based Virtue Motors plc. It has dealerships in Stockton-on-Tees, Durham, Sunderland, Malton and York. They're great people to buy a car from. Today we're joined in our studio by Gavin Cordwell-Smith, CEO of Hellens Group, a leading developer in the North East. Down the line we've Caroline Moody, Group Managing Director of Moody Logistics, a transport and warehousing company, and Fraser Brown, Managing Director of MotorVise, automotive industry consultants. But first, before we dive into the programme, earlier I spoke to Darlington MP Peter Gibson regarding plans to axe vital services to and from Darlington railway station, affecting Tees Valley, County Durham and North Yorkshire. Here's what he had to say.
The issue is that there's a proposed new timetable for the East Coast Main Line, and what we are going to see in the Tees Valley, particularly at Darlington Station, is a reduced number of services stopping here. So instead of 31 in one direction, we go down to 28. Instead of 31 in the other direction, we go down to 25. And Darlington doesn't get that competition from those open access operators. So we've got the worst of both worlds. It also has a detrimental impact on the stopping of Transpennine trains throughout the region as well. So this has real impacts for businesses, people being able to get to and from work, to and from London or Edinburgh for their business meetings. And it's all being done in the endeavour to get trains to Newcastle and to Edinburgh faster at the expense of the Tees Valley.
The claim is that there's not enough capacity on the track, and that's the big issue, particularly with more freight on the track. What is the argument to that point?
Every single one of these trains that will go 5 minutes or 10 minutes faster to Newcastle or Edinburgh respectively still has to have a path through Darlington train station. And so it's ridiculous to suggest that that train cannot stop. Yes, the train will be slightly slower by a couple of minutes, but to sacrifice that connectivity that we have as a region at the expense of them trying to get more passengers on the train in Edinburgh or Newcastle, it's a step too far. And really what they need to do is to change these proposed timetable changes.
What about the arguments also about the economy of Tees Valley, which has changed dramatically in very few months? Since the budget, really, there's been significant announcements and the future prospects for Tees Valley's economy have improved.
Graham, you make an excellent point, and LNER are basing these decisions on data from 2019. So pre the saving of the airport, pre the introduction of flights, pre the announcement of Treasury jobs, BEIS jobs, Department for International Trade, pre the Freeport announcement. So pre all of these fantastic pieces of innovative news for our region have not been taken into account in considering these timetable changes. It's short-sighted and it's wrong.
Finally, what do you want businesses who are watching this to do?
It's really important that the voices of Tees Valley businesses in Darlington, Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, Redcar, Stockton, make their voices heard to the consultation. So they can complete the consultation document on LNER's website, they can write to me or their respective Member of Parliament, they can write to Ben Houchin, and they can take to social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, and make their voices heard so that LNER hear the voices of Tees Valley businesses that this is something that they don't want to happen.
Well, that was an interesting discussion with Peter Gibson MP, and today, that was recorded yesterday, today he raised it at Prime Minister's questions. Sadly, Boris didn't give a definitive answer on it. Gavin Cordwell-Smith, you are obviously investing in the Tees Valley and you have premises in North Yorkshire as well. What's your view on this train station situation?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems somewhat surprising, doesn't it, given, concur with what Peter said, with all the investment that we've got coming to Darlington in particular, with Treasury North and various other departments looking to relocate here. It just seems a bit odd and not a great start to the levelling up agenda, really. It's sending out all the wrong signals. I suppose one of the questions, I know we'd rather have regular services, but if they're reducing the number of services, presumably their capacity is going to increase. Are we going to see a reduction in costs of fares? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues.
Fair point. Or we're going to go on the plane, which I checked out actually the Heathrow plane from from Teesside Airport isn't that expensive. I'm hopefully going to use it in the next few weeks. Let's pick this subject of general transport issues up with Caroline Moody and Fraser Brown. Caroline, obviously you run a logistics company. I suppose in a way you compete with rail, but road is dominant when it comes to transporting goods. How is business, and what is your view of the way in which road and rail align?
Business, first of all, is very good. We've had probably 2 good releases have come out of lockdown. It's been very difficult to cope with the volumes, both with the capacity on the capital equipment everybody has, but also with some driver shortages the industry's seeing at the moment. So that's been difficult. How it aligns with rail, well, funny enough, when we first started in the overnight pallet market, we used to be part of a British rail enterprise called Track 29, which tried very hard to link the road and the rail together, but it just kind of didn't work at the time. I think mainly the rail side of things is for much larger shipments over a longer distance. I guess the UK doesn't see a lot of that, or we don't see that as competition particularly, because for the average journey time on a truck, where it's maybe 4 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours, there's not enough capacity there in the length of the stretch of the trunking to be worth cost effective. So it's really when it's really long distance and things that it would, I know sort of the likes of Tesco's bring things in from abroad on rail and that sort of thing. That's where it works well.
That's interesting. Fraser, people are obviously picking up in the car market, and I talked to one large car dealership who said that public transport is something they would choose second, and some of the purchasing of particularly cheaper second-hand small cars around cities is because people are cautious about public transport in the COVID environment.
Yeah, for myself, I used to use Darlington Station multiple times a week before the pandemic, and I also used Teesside Airport quite a bit, more so of late because there are more services. But interestingly, I have reverted back to my private car, my private space, where I'm not exposed to multiple people. That is generally what we're seeing across transports at the moment. And in the automotive sector, we're seeing a real problem getting hold of cars. After the lockdown, demand for new cars went through the roof, but because production lines have been shut down for a long time, they simply can't keep up with that demand. So we've got a real shortage of new cars, and that is then having a knock-on effect because the part exchanges are not coming back in, as people aren't able to replace their new cars as promptly as they would like. So we're not seeing any used cars coming into the industry. So we're expecting used car values to rocket over the coming weeks and months.
Yes, I've actually been in the car market recently and was pleased to buy a new car from Virtue. I've seen they're sponsoring it. I might plug that in, entirely unrelated, I should say. I had the car delivered very recently, but I had to wait quite a while, not because of the dealership, but because of demand and because of chips. There is an issue with electronic chips for car central processors, isn't there?
Yeah, we've got a number of issues in terms of the supply. So if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, when manufacturers unilaterally shut down their plants thinking that there would be no demand and they had COVID issues to manage within their businesses, we ended up in a situation where they then knocked on to their suppliers and said, we're not going to be taking your goods anymore. And one of the compounding factors of this was that microchip suppliers could very quickly repurpose their businesses and supply chips for the huge demand for laptops that came up during the lockdown period. So as consumers changed their demands and their needs during that period, we then saw the suppliers to the automotive sector retool, move to supply other industries. And that was also compounded by the fact that one of the microchip factories burnt down. And in addition to that, to get vehicles on the road, we're also seeing supply issues with aluminium and rubber. And I do know it's not just the automotive sector that are struggling with this, because some of the property things that I'm involved with, we're also struggling to get get supplies of very basic things like insulation and even silicone and cement. So it's a very different world post-pandemic, trying to catch up with the demand that's always been there, but this period where supply just didn't happen due to COVID.
Well, there's a lot to pick up on that, and I'm also going to put it in the context of jobs. So let's first of all have a look at some jobs data. A survey of 8,000 workers commissioned by the Resolution Foundation. 4 in 5 employees who were furloughed during the first and second lockdown are now back at work, leaving quite a few still on furlough, and job vacancy rates also now higher than pre-pandemic levels. Now, this all fits in. Caroline, you're busy freighting goods around by road. You are busy, Fraser, I know, helping retailers in the motor sector recruit staff, and I know you're busy selling goods for the construction sector. Can I ask you each to place the state of your trade in the context of supplies and jobs? First, Gavin.
Yeah. In terms of supplies, we are experiencing a lot of similar issues in the construction industry. One of our businesses manufactures paving slabs, and we're subject to raw material increases, etc. We've experienced phenomenal demand over the last 12 months. We were very fortunate in that we'd made a big investment in our plant in Catterick, not far from here, about 18 months ago, and we've been able to largely meet that demand. But have been issues around materials, etc. We've talked about the furlough scheme. We did initially use the furlough scheme, but we're in a very fortunate position where we're not having to rely on the furlough scheme at this present time.
Caroline, if I remember rightly, during the pandemic when we spoke, you weren't furloughing people because you were quite essential to getting goods and particularly food around the country. But what's your view of where we stand now on furlough?
Well, we did furlough for a very short period of time when demand dropped in that initial May, June, but it was probably only for a period of about 6 to 8 weeks, and then very quickly realised actually we needed everybody back. And yes, I think whilst the government, we couldn't complain, they've been brilliant in my belief, for businesses with this level of support they've given. In some ways, I kind of feel maybe they're too supportive for too long, and people have become reliant on it, and it's creating a little bit of a false economy of, there's a lot of people sat at home quite happy to sit at home on 80%, some people as well. And we need to get those people back into the job market, really, because it's kind of creating, in my opinion, a little bit of a false sense of shortage of labour, when actually there are a lot of people out there who could be back in work and doing something productive.
The government seems to have started to phase out the furlough programme. The 1st of July, there are different criteria for employers to claim back. And doing that holistically, do you think, any of you, that it would be better rather to constrain the furlough programme only to those businesses that have mandatory closures, such as there are mandatory rules on airlines, there are mandatory restrictions on entertainment? Let's go to Fraser first.
I think, Graham, to be honest with you, that would be a bit harsh. Our industry, the motor industry, has remained largely open other than the first few weeks of the lockdown. But my industry, the one thing I do, we supply the automotive sector. We were never forced to close, but all of my customers shut, so nobody bought anything off me. My revenues went from 150,000 to £1,500 in 1 month. So, a drop off like you've never seen before. And I have to say, I was very impressed by what Rishi put in place. Fast, firm and supportive actions. So for our industry, for my small feeder business into a larger industry, it's been absolutely essential to have all the support, because we never got any of the grants that were available to businesses that were forced to close. Without furlough, we would not be here now as a business. Having said that, yes, there is a point that there are people out there that are quite happy to sit at home on furlough that actually could be out working. And yes, there is a point at which we should start to rationalise this, because certainly many industries, the hospitality industry across North Yorkshire and the motor industry that we're heavily involved with, have a real issue trying to get people into the workplace. Right now, we are currently working on filling 260 jobs for dealers across the United Kingdom. And last month we filled almost 180 jobs with our Recruitment Day service. And so, yeah, it's a balance, it really is. And I think the furlough scheme has been absolutely essential to get us through this period. I believe our company may have survived but there would have been me and one other instead of the 30 people that I employ on a daily basis around me at the moment. So, very impressed with the government support, and I do think the time has come to, wherever possible, get people back to work. Clearly with hospitality, as in nightclubs and the kind of the travel industry, it's slightly different because they still have restrictions, but most of the businesses now can get back to it. And, yes, there's probably time for some rationalisation.
Furlough, oxygen, time to turn the oxygen off to the non-affected businesses, Caroline?
Yes, I think so, because, I think they need to, sometimes for them, they don't become innovative enough to look at other ways of doing things. And a bit like Gavin said about the car industry, where they sort of closed down very quickly, a lot of the big people, and then therefore, in hindsight, could they've just kept going and then the chips would have been there? So sometimes it's created other problems later down the line, hasn't it, by it being too easy to close down at the very start of it all. If they'd had to keep going, that might have been a different outcome now.
Now, Caroline, you obviously have to recruit skilled people. I know that in the warehousing and in the driver, there's different levels of skills that you have in your business. And you were talking about recruitment earlier. You've just heard Fraser talking about recruitment and the jobs that he's trying to get people into. Are you seeing that it isn't just a shortage of recruitment, but there's also a wage inflation effect?
Yeah, that's a bit of a concern at the moment. I mean, yes, the haulage industry has been underfunded for years. And I think it's been the lack of value people place on transport and what they're prepared to pay for it. The average person, even for their Tesco's delivery or something through Amazon, they begrudge paying a few pounds for delivery. Nobody wants to pay for it. But of course, it's got to be paid for, and that's been reflected really in a lot of the wages, which has been a bit unfair on our industry. People would happily pay for a £30 taxi ride home from a night out, but ask them to pay 30 quid for a pallet somewhere the other end of the country, and they're up in arms about it. So I'm hoping, some of this would highlight the importance of our industry and how people need to really value it to keep it going, because if we can't get drivers in the industry, then it stops and affects everything throughout the UK. Supermarket deliveries. I know a few big national suppliers now who are saying they can't get the deliveries into supermarkets, and that's going to be an issue. I mean, I think the driver shortage is not really driven by the lack of wages. I think it's been driven personally by the lack of new people coming into the market in the last year, with there being no tests and things like that. But while we catch up, I don't think, it still is an underfunded area as well.
That's a very interesting point, Caroline. That's a logistical point of logjam on tests. Entirely rational point. I've never heard that made, but you have to have an expert on to sometimes make the obvious. Yeah. Fraser, what is your view on what the recruitment issue is causing to wages in retailers, in motor dealerships?
It's really interesting. It's a kind of a compound effect. We've got the lack of people that can come in from the rest of the EU now, and we're finding that's having a significant effect on the certain areas within the dealership, certainly valeting, car cleaning, the technicians area within car dealerships. We're not able to bring people in as we were previously from countries outside the UK. We're also seeing a challenge in terms of getting people to come into the motor industry, because we work quite long hours in the motor industry. You can work between 55 and 65 hours a week. So what dealers are having to do is to really look at how they look after their people. Can they work them on a 5-day-a-week basis? Can we be more flexible and supportive? And we can't work from home when we're in a showroom selling cars, but what we can do is look at how we balance the work-home life interest for the people that are working within car dealerships, so that it becomes a more attractive place to be. So whilst we're not seeing financial increases, because sales side of the business is commission driven largely within the automotive sector, what we are seeing is a bit of competition on work-home life balance, which is not something we've been very good at in the motor industry historically.
Well, look, Caroline, Fraser, Gavin, thank you for talking to us today. We're going to have to leave it there because time has overcome us. It's been a very interesting conversation and some fascinating points on logistics from you, Caroline, that sometimes we do all take for granted. Thank you for joining us on Business Unmuted. There'll be more at the same time next week.